Whispers in the woods. The woods were different without Martha. Mr. Abernathy shuffled through the undergrowth, each fallen leaf a brittle reminder of her absence. Autumn had painted the trees in hues of gold and crimson, colors she would have adored. He remembered her pointing, her eyes sparkling as she identified each tree, each shade. Now, the beauty felt like a cruel mockery. He reached into his pocket, his fingers tracing the worn edges of her favorite handkerchief, the scent of lavender faint but still present. It was all he had left. The path wound deeper, the air growing cooler, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the dense canopy. He hadn't intended a venture so far. He'd only sought a moment of peace, a brief escape from the suffocating silence of his empty house. But the woods, once a shared sanctuary, now seemed to beckon him further, promising something he couldn't quite name. A whimper, faint as the rustle of leaves, snagged his attention. He stopped, his hand tightening around the handkerchief. At first, he dismissed it as the wind, a trick of the ear. But then he heard it again, a fragile cry that tugged at his heart. He moved towards the sound, his steps slow and hesitant, the grief momentarily overshadowed by a prickle of unease. The cries led him to a clearing, dominated by an ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal arms. And there, chained to the thick trunk, were two small girls. They were twins, he realized instantly. Identical in their pale faces, their tangled blonde hair, their wide, frightened eyes. Lily, he would later learn, was the more reserved, her gaze darting around the clearing, assessing the danger. Daisy, her face streaked with tears, looked at him with a desperate plea. The chains, thick and cold, bound their wrists to the tree. They were dressed in simple cotton dresses, now torn and soiled, their bare feet muddy and scratched. "Please," Daisy choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Help us." Mr. Abernathy felt a surge of anger, a white-hot fury that momentarily eclipsed his grief. Who could do such a thing? He knelt before them, his own hands trembling. "Don't worry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to get you out of here." He fumbled in his pocket for his knife, the small blade suddenly feeling inadequate against the heavy chains. He worked quickly, sawing at the metal links, his hands aching with the effort. Lily watched him, her eyes narrowed, her silence a stark contrast to Daisy's quiet sobs. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Lily hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the shadows at the edge of the clearing. We don't know," she whispered. Daisy whimpered, shaking her head. "They wore masks." Finally, with a snap, the first chain broke. He moved to the second, the metal biting into his skin. Another snap, and Lily was free. He turned to Daisy, repeating the process, her small hand clutching his arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, examining their wrists, raw and red from the chafing chains. "We're cold," Daisy said, shivering. Mr. Abernathy removed his own coat, draping it around Daisy's shoulders. It swallowed her whole, the worn fabric smelling faintly of piped tobacco and lavender. He looked at Lily, who still stood silently, her eyes fixed on him. He removed his scarf, offering it to her. She took it hesitantly, wrapping it around her neck. "Come on," he said, taking their hands. Their small fingers felt fragile and cold in his own. "Let's get you home." He didn't know where their home was or who their parents were. He only knew that he couldn't leave them here, alone and frightened in the whispering woods. As he led them away from the clearing, he glanced back at the ancient oak, a shiver running down his spine. The woods held secrets, dark and terrible secrets, and he had a feeling that he had only just scratched the surface. A cottage of hope. The cottage was smaller than Lily expected, a single story hunched beneath a thatch of moss-eaten reeds. Smoke curled from the chimney, a fragile invitation against the deepening twilight. Mr. Abernathy pushed open the door, the hinges groaning a rusty welcome. "In you go, girls. Don't mind the mess." Lily hesitated, Daisy clutching her hand. The air inside was thick with the smell of wood smoke and something faintly sweet like dried apples. A single oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the room, illuminating mismatched furniture and stacks of books that threatened to topple. A half-finished carving of a bird sat on a workbench near the window, with shavings scattered like fallen feathers. Daisy tugged Lily forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. "It's cozy," she whispered, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. Mr. Abernathy chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Cozy it is. Not much to look at, but it keeps the rain out. Now, sit yourselves down. I'll rustle something up to eat." He moved with surprising agility for a man his size, gathering kindling and adding it to the fire in the hearth. Soon, flames licked hungrily at the wood, casting a warm glow over the room. Lily watched him, her eyes narrowed, trying to decipher his intentions. Was this kindness genuine, or was there something else lurking beneath the surface? Daisy, however, seemed to have no such reservations. She perched on the edge of a worn armchair, her fingers tracing the faded floral pattern of the fabric. "Did you carve the bird?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine interest. Mr. Abernathy glanced over his shoulder, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. I did. Still need some work, though. Maybe you can tell me what you think when it's finished." He set a pot of water on the fire and began chopping vegetables on a rough wooden board. The rhythmic thump of the knife was strangely comforting. Soon, the aroma of onions and carrots filled the air, making Lily's stomach rumble. "What's it like, having a home?" Daisy asked softly, her gaze fixed on the flames. Lily squeezed her hand. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken memories. Mr. Abernathy paused, his movements slowing. "It's a place to belong," he said quietly. "A place where you're safe. A place where you can be yourselves." He added a handful of lentils to the pot. "Tell me about yourselves, girls. If you're willing, of course." Lily glanced at Daisy, who was staring at her expectantly. She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. We were at a place," she began slowly, choosing her words with care. "A place with lots of other children." "An orphanage," Daisy supplied, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Abernathy nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you ran away?" Lily nodded. "It wasn't a good place." She didn't elaborate, the memories too painful to articulate. The cold, the hunger, the constant fear, she pushed them back, burying them deep inside. Daisy shivered, despite the warmth of the fire. "They didn't like us being together," she murmured, her eyes welling up with tears. "They always tried to separate us." Mr. Abernathy's brow furrowed. "Separate you? Why?" Lily tightened her grip on Daisy's hand. Because we're stronger together," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "They knew that." He stirred the pot, the spoon clinking against the metal. "Well, you're together now," he said, his voice gentle. "And as long as you're here, no one will ever try to separate you again." He ladled the stew into 2 chipped bowls and handed them to the girls. Lily took hers cautiously, her eyes still fixed on Mr. Abernathy. But as she tasted the warm, savory broth, a sliver of hope flickered within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had found a safe haven, a place where they could finally be free. Daisy, already halfway through her bowl, looked up at Mr. Abernathy, her face smeared with gravy. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "This is the best food I've ever tasted." Skepticism and shadows. Sheriff Brody leaned back, the swivel chair under him a chorus of geriatric complaints, and leveled a curdling stare at Mr. Abernathy. "Chained, you say?" "To a tree." He punctuated the question with a tap of a pudgy finger against the brimming ashtray. "And you simply liberated them?" Abernathy shifted, the chill of the linoleum seeping through his boot soles. The sheriff's dismissive tone, though anticipated, still unsettled him. "Yes, Sheriff. Their condition was appalling. Underfed, terrified. I couldn't abandon them." "And who, pray tell, provided this landscaping?" "A culprit you happen to observe." Brody's voice was thick with disbelief. "No, sir. Just the girls. They weren't very forthcoming." He omitted their hushed warnings, the primal fear gleaming in their eyes, a terror that hinted at unseen horrors. Brody exhaled, a sound like a slow puncture. Abernathy, you're a decent man, no question. But your empathy's outrunning your good sense. These things tend to resolve themselves. Probably a juvenile prank taken too far. I'll dispatch Miller to scout the area tomorrow. But I advise against poking this particular bear. The locals frown on outside interference. A glacial dread gripped Abernathy's stomach. He'd sought assistance, official inquiry. He received a caution. But Sheriff, what if they remain in harm's way? What if their tormentor returns? Brody chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Now, Abernathy, rein in that runaway imagination. Keep the girl secure, and trust the authorities to handle it. That's what this badge is for. He indicated the tarnished star affixed to his shirt. The audience concluded. Back at the cottage, twilight bled into full night. Abernathy observed Lily and Daisy coloring at the kitchen table, their faces bathed in the golden light of the kerosene lamp. Lily, brow furrowed in concentration, shaded a flower a precise crimson. Daisy, a whirlwind of smiles and youthful exuberance, splashed blues and greens across her page with wild abandon. He couldn't dispel the premonition the heat endangered them. Later, after tucking them into the spare room's small beds, Abernathy sat vigil by the window, a shotgun cradled in his lap. The wind keened outside, the old panes rattling its mournful song through the eaves. Each groan of the aged house, each rustle in the leaves, jolted him with adrenaline. Around midnight, a twig snapped outside, followed by another. He strained, listening acutely. A phantom shape danced across the far wall, born of moonlight filtering through the trees, twisting into grotesque parodies of familiar things. His grip tightened on the shotgun. He crept to the window and peered out. The yard was a sea of impenetrable darkness, illuminated only by the sliver of moon sliding behind fast-moving clouds. He saw nothing, but he felt it, a presence lurking, observing. He checked on the twins. Asleep, Lily nestled protectively against Daisy. He tucked the blanket tighter around them, his heart filled with a fierce protectiveness he didn't know he possessed. The night stretched, a relentless cycle of shadows and spectral sounds. A grating noise emanated from the back door, as if something were testing its defenses. He rushed over, weapon raised, and flung it open. Nothing, only the wind and the sighing trees. His senses didn't deceive him. Someone was out there. Someone sought the twins. And Sheriff Brody, mired in skepticism and bureaucratic inertia, offered no solace. Abernathy stood alone, lessons in hiding. The cheerfulness had drained from the cottage, leaving a residue of fear that clung to the furniture and settled in the corners. Mr. Abernathy, his face etched with worry lines Lily hadn't noticed before, gathered them in the small parlor. "Girls," he began, his voice unusually grave, "I need to show you something. Something important." He led them to the back of the cottage, past the pantry overflowing with Mrs. Abernathy's preserves, to a narrow space behind the ancient water heater. It was cramped and dusty, smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten things. "This," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is your first hiding place. If anyone you don't know comes to the door, or if you hear noises outside, you come here. Understand?" Daisy's lower lip trembled. "But why, Mr. Abernathy?" "Just in case, sweetheart. Just in case." He wouldn't meet her eyes. He showed them how to squeeze between the wall and the heater, how to stay low and quiet. Lily felt the grit of dust against her cheek, smelled the metallic tang of the water pipes. He revealed other spots, too. A crawl space beneath the stairs, accessible through a loose floorboard. A deep recess in the attic behind a stack of moth-eaten quilts. Each one was smaller and more claustrophobic than the last. Next came the lessons in silence. Mr. Abernathy, normally a booming presence, demonstrated how to walk without making a sound. He moved with a strange, cautious grace, his feet barely brushing the floorboards. "Like a cat," he murmured. "Always listen. Always be aware of your surroundings. The floor will betray you. The wind, too, can carry your voice." Lily tried to mimic him, placing each foot carefully, but the floorboards creaked under her weight. Daisy, even lighter than Lily, giggled nervously, her foot catching on a rug. "Shoo," Mr. Abernathy cautioned, his eyes wide. "Pretend you were mice, hiding from the hawk." He taught them to listen, really listen, to distinguish the rustle of leaves from the snap of a twig, the distant bark of a dog from the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. He had them close their eyes and identify the sounds of the cottage, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the wind whistling through a crack in the window pane. Then came the practice. Mr. Abernathy would call out a warning, a made-up signal like "the crows are coming," and the girls would have to find a hiding place and remain perfectly still until he gave the all-clear. The first time, Daisy darted behind the curtains, her bright yellow dress a beacon in the dim room. Lily, remembering Mr. Abernathy's instructions, squeezed into the space behind the water heater. She could hear Daisy's panicked breathing, the frantic thump of her own heart. Mr. Abernathy found Daisy immediately. "Too obvious, sweetheart. You need to blend in. Become invisible." They practiced again and again, until their legs ached and their throats were dry. The fear, once a distant hum, grew louder, more insistent. Lily could feel it radiating from Daisy, a tangible thing. During one practice run, Lily hid in the attic, nestled amongst the dusty quilts. The air was thick and stifling, and the scent of mothballs filled her nostrils. She imagined something, creeping up the stairs, their footsteps slow and deliberate. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear. A long time seemed to pass. The silence was broken only by the frantic fluttering of a bird trapped in the eaves. Then a voice, soft and close. "Lily, are you up here?" It was Mr. Abernathy. But for a moment, she hadn't been sure. The fear had twisted his voice, made it sound unfamiliar, menacing. She crawled out from beneath the quilts, her face pale and streaked with dust. Daisy stood behind Mr. Abernathy, her eyes wide with concern. "Good girl," he said, his voice gentle now. "You stayed hidden. That's what's important." But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the game had changed. This wasn't practice anymore. This was preparation. And she wasn't sure what they were preparing for, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was something terrible. The storm and the intruder. Rain lashed against the cottage windows, a relentless drumming that seemed determined to shatter the glass. Wind howled like a banshee, clawing at the eaves and rattling the door in its frame. Lily, perched on the edge of her bed, pulled the covers tighter around her. Daisy, usually a sound sleeper, stirred beside her, whimpering softly. "It's okay, Daisy," Lily whispered, reaching out to stroke her sister's hair. "Just a storm." But it was more than just a storm. It was in the way the old house groaned under the assault, the way shadows danced menacingly in the corners of the room, fueled by the flickering candlelight. Lily felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. A particularly violent gust slammed against the front door, followed by a splintering crack. Lily's eyes widened. That wasn't the wind. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. "Stay here," she instructed Daisy, her voice barely audible above the storm's fury. Daisy, now fully awake, clung to her sister's arm, her blue eyes wide with fear. "Lily, I'm scared." "I know," Lily said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "But we have to be quiet." Lily crept towards the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed her ear against the wood, straining to hear above the wind's roar. There was a scraping sound, followed by the distinct creak of the door being forced open. A gust of wind and rain blasted into the room, extinguishing the candle and plunging them into darkness. Lily gasped, pulling Daisy behind her. A shadowy figure filled the doorway, its features obscured by the darkness and the driving rain. "Girls!" A raspy voice echoed through the cottage. "Where are you?" Lily's mind raced. She had to protect Daisy. She couldn't let this thing take them. She remembered the small, rusty poker leaning against the fireplace in the main room. It was their only chance. "Stay here," she repeated, pushing Daisy towards the corner of the room, behind the old oak wardrobe. "Don't make a sound." Daisy nodded, her small body trembling. Lily took a deep breath and slipped out of the bedroom, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. She felt her way through the darkness, her hands outstretched, until she reached the fireplace. The poker was cold and heavy in her hand. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles white. The intruder was moving through the cottage, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence between the thunderclaps. "I know you're here," he growled. "Come out, girls. It'll be easier for everyone." Lily pressed herself against the wall, her breath catching in her throat. He was getting closer. She could smell him now, a musty, unpleasant odor that made her stomach churn. He reached the bedroom door, his silhouette a dark blot against the faint light filtering in from the storm. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Daisy," he called out, his voice deceptively gentle. "Lily." He moved towards the wardrobe, his hand outstretched. Lily knew she had to act now. She burst from the shadows, raising the poker above her head. "Leave her alone," she screamed, bringing the poker down with all her might. The poker connected with a sickening thud. The intruder grunted, stumbling backwards. Lily didn't hesitate. She swung again and again, fueled by adrenaline and fear. He raised his arms to protect his face, his back hitting the wall. He let out a guttural roar of pain and anger. "You little brat." He lunged at her, his hand grasping for her arm. Lily screamed, dropping the poker. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a vice. "Daisy, run," Lily cried. "Run and hide." He yanked Lily towards him, pulling her out of the bedroom. Daisy, frozen with fear, watched as the intruder dragged her sister towards the door, disappearing into the storm-ravaged night. A father's fight. The crash downstairs echoed again, louder this time, punctuated by the distinct sound of splintering wood. Lily grabbed Daisy, pulling her behind the worn floral armchair. Daisy whimpered, her face pale in the dim light filtering from the hallway. "Stay here," Lily whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Don't make a sound." Mr. Abernathy was already moving, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper gloom of the hallway. Lily watched, heart hammering, as he disappeared towards the staircase. A moment later, she heard his voice, low and guttural. "Who's there?" Silence. Then another crash, followed by a strangled yell. Lily pushed Daisy further behind the armchair. Daisy's small hand gripped Lily's arm, so tightly her nails dug into her skin. Lily barely noticed. She strained to hear what was happening, the blood pounding in her ears. Suddenly, a gunshot ripped through the quiet. Daisy screamed, burying her face in Lily's side. Lily held her tight, her own body rigid with fear. Mr. Abernathy reappeared in the doorway, his face a mask of grim determination. He was holding his old hunting rifle, the barrel still smoking slightly. A thin trickle of blood ran down his forehead, disappearing into his gray hair. "Stay here," he repeated, his voice hoarse but firm. "I'll handle this." He moved back into the hallway, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Lily risked a peek around the edge of the armchair. She saw Mr. Abernathy standing at the bottom of the stairs, rifle raised. A figure lunged from the shadows, a dark shape against the flickering light of the storm outside. Lily couldn't make out any features, only a blur of movement. Mr. Abernathy fired again. This time, there was a grunt of pain, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. A brief, brutal struggle ensued, a flurry of fists and muffled curses. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, unable to watch. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Lily opened her eyes. Mr. Abernathy was breathing heavily, leaning against the wall for support. The figure was gone. "He's gone," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice ragged. He ran off into the storm. He straightened up, wincing slightly. He wiped the blood from his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing it across his face. "Are you hurt?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just a scratch," he said, trying to smile. "He won't be back." Lily wasn't so sure. She looked towards the open doorway, the wind howling outside. The storm seemed to be growing stronger, the rain lashing against the windows. The darkness felt alive, full of unseen threats. "We should call the police," she said. Mr. Abernathy shook his head. "No time. He'll be long gone by now." Besides, I don't want them asking questions. But why not? Daisy asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Abernathy hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously. It's complicated, he said finally. Just trust me, girls. It's better this way. He picked up the rifle, checking the chamber. Come on, he said. Let's get you both upstairs. It's not safe down here. He led them back upstairs, his arm protectively around Daisy. Lily followed behind, her mind racing. Who was the intruder? And why did Mr. Abernathy want to call the police? As they reached the top of the stairs, Lily glanced back down the hallway. The front door was still open, the wind whipping through the house. She could smell the rain, the metallic tang of blood, and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Whatever had just happened, Lily knew it wasn't over. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside the house, and she had a feeling they were right in the middle of it. The town awakens. The rooster's crow sliced through the morning mist, but it wasn't the only sound disturbing the peace of Havenwood. Whispers, like tendrils of ivy, were already snaking their way through the town. Whispers of a break-in, whispers of children found chained in the woods, whispers of Mr. Abernathy and the Blackwood orphanage. Mr. Abernathy, his face etched with worry lines deeper than yesterday's, stood in Sheriff Brody's office. The air hung thick with the smell of stale coffee and Brody's dismissive attitude. Sheriff, I'm telling you, someone was in my house. And those girls, they were terrified. Abernathy's voice was strained, a plea barely masking his frustration. Brody leaned back in his creaking chair, a toothpick jutting from his mouth. Abernathy, I already told you. Probably just some kids playing pranks. As for the girls, they're orphans. Probably just a little dramatic. He spat the toothpick into a chipped mug. Agnes runs a tight ship. I'm sure they're well cared for. But Sheriff, the chains, the fear in their eyes. Abernathy trailed off, knowing he wasn't getting through. Brody's skepticism was a wall of granite. Defeated, Abernathy left the office, the screen door slamming shut behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet street, a punctuation mark on Brody's indifference. Meanwhile, the whispers were growing louder. Mrs. Gable, tending her roses, overheard Martha next door recounting Abernathy's story to young Thomas, the butcher's boy. Thomas, wide-eyed, related to his father, who in turn shared it with Mr. Peterson at the general store. The news spread like wildfire, fueled by concern and a growing unease. Lily Thompson, having helped Daisy braid her hair into pigtails, listened intently as Abernathy spoke to them at breakfast. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the genuine concern for their well-being. Daisy, ever the optimist, squeezed his hand. Don't worry, Mr. Abernathy. We'll be okay. But Lily noticed the tremor in her sister's small hand, a silent testament to their fear. Later, Lily ventured into town, her senses on high alert. She overheard snippets of conversations everywhere. The bakery, the post office, even the churchyard. The twins, the orphanage, Agnes Blackwood. These were the threads being woven into the tapestry of Havenwood's morning. Agnes Blackwood, seemingly oblivious to the rising tide of suspicion, greeted everyone with her usual saccharine smile. She moved through the town square like royalty, her silk scarf fluttering in the breeze. But today, the smiles felt forced, the greetings a little too loud. Lily noticed a flicker of something dark in Agnes's eyes when someone mentioned Mr. Abernathy's name, a fleeting glimpse of the woman beneath the mask. At the general store, Lily overheard Mrs. Peterson questioning Agnes. Agnes, dear, have you heard about the Abernathy place? And those poor children. Agnes placed a perfectly manicured hand on Mrs. Peterson's arm. Oh, Martha, you know how stories get exaggerated. The girls are perfectly happy at the orphanage. Mr. Abernathy must be mistaken, bless his heart. Her voice dripped with honey, but Lily saw the steel beneath the surface. As Agnes left the store, a low murmur followed her. For the first time, the townsfolk weren't charmed by her performance. Doubt had been planted, and it was taking root. That evening, as dusk settled over Havenwood, a group of townsfolk gathered outside Abernathy's house. They carried casseroles, pies, and offers of help. They came not because they were asked, but because they were compelled. Sarah Miller, known for her blunt honesty, spoke for the group. Abernathy, she called out, her voice firm. We heard what happened. You're not alone in this. Abernathy stood on his porch, his heart swelling with gratitude. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, his community. For the first time since finding the twins, a glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. Havenwood was waking up, and it was starting to ask questions. Unmasking Blackwood. Sheriff Brody spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth in front of Blackwood Orphanage. Abernathy, you're chasing shadows. Agnes Blackwood's run this place for nigh on 20 years. Never had a complaint. He adjusted his belt, the buckle straining against his substantial belly. Chained to a tree, you say? Sounds like a tall tale to me. Abernathy stood his ground, his jaw tight. Sheriff, I saw them. They were terrified, and they're not the only ones who've whispered about this place. He gestured towards the orphanage, a grim, two-story building with peeling paint and windows that stared like vacant eyes. Brody sighed theatrically. All right, let's get this over with. He motioned to Deputy Miller and 2 members of the town council, who shuffled nervously behind him. Show's on, folks. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of dust and boiled cabbage. Agnes Blackwood greeted them with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sheriff Brody, what a pleasant surprise. Is there something I can help you with? Brody, despite his earlier skepticism, seemed uncomfortable under her gaze. He mumbled something about a routine inspection. As the others began their cursory examination of the main rooms, Abernathy, with a determined glint in his eye, led Lily and Daisy deeper into the building. Lily, ever observant, pointed to a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the wall near the kitchen. There, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Behind the pantry, Abernathy pulled the heavy pantry aside, revealing a narrow, dirt-floored cellar. The stench of damp earth and something indefinably foul rose from below. He lit a match, the flickering flame illuminating a flight of rickety wooden steps. Daisy clung to Lily's hand, her earlier optimism momentarily extinguished. I don't like this place, she murmured, her voice trembling. Abernathy descended, the wood groaning under his weight. The cellar was small, barely large enough to stand in. Chains, thick and rusted, were bolted to the far wall. Scratches marred the damp stone floor. The air felt heavy, stagnant, thick with the residue of fear. He emerged, his face grim. Sheriff, I think you need to see this. Brody, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by a flicker of unease, followed Abernathy down. The town council members hung back, their faces pale. Agnes Blackwood remained upstairs, a strange calmness settling over her features. The evidence in the cellar was undeniable. The chains, the scratches, the oppressive atmosphere spoke of a dark reality hidden beneath the orphanage's veneer of respectability. Even Brody, hardened by years of law enforcement, couldn't deny what he saw. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Whispers turned into accusations. Former residents came forward with stories of neglect, cruelty, and outright abuse. The orphanage, once a fixture of the town, became a symbol of shame. As the authorities swarmed the building, Abernathy found Lily and Daisy huddled together in the garden, their faces pale and drawn. He knelt beside them, his eyes filled with compassion. Girls, he said softly, I know this is difficult, but you're safe now. You're safe with me. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. I want to adopt you. I want you to be my daughters. Lily looked at him, her eyes searching his. Daisy, her usual optimism flickering back to life, threw her arms around him. Really? You really want us? Abernathy hugged them tight, feeling a surge of warmth in his chest. More than anything in the world. Agnes Blackwood watched them from the window, her expression unreadable. As Sheriff Brody approached her, she remained passive, almost serene. But a faint tremor in her hands betrayed the carefully constructed facade. The mask had finally slipped. A home full of love. The collection jar at the mercantile brimmed. Gleaming coins and folded bills winked in the afternoon light, a sunbeam highlighting Mrs. Henderson's additions. Paper hearts and a childlike drawing of Mr. Abernathy with two stick figures, presumably Lily and Daisy. The earnestness was disarming. No one dared to poke fun. Instead, hands reached into pockets and purses, adding to the bounty. Even Sheriff Brody, his expression still an enigma, contributed a pristine $20 bill. Lily's stomach clenched as she watched him depart, sensing a shift in his demeanor these past weeks. A softening, perhaps. She could only hope he'd chosen their side completely, considering whatever scheme simmered in Mr. Abernathy's mind for those who'd left them bound to that tree. A memory Daisy seemed eager to bury beneath distractions like the elaborate sponge sugar blossoms adorning Mrs. Peterson's vanilla cake, her favorite. "Do you think he'll let me have a slice? A big one?" she breathed. Lily squeezed her sister's small hand. "He'd probably give you the whole thing if you batted your eyelashes." Yet, an unsettling feeling lingered. Family wasn't simply conjured by desire. That evening, around the kitchen table, official documents formed a stark barrier. The air vibrated with unspoken questions. Mr. Abernathy, his voice a deep, resonant hum, explained the county's reservations, his age, his unconventional way of life. Lily understood. He was a loner, a man of few words, hardly the picture of parental perfection. "They need assurances," he stated, his gaze locked on Lily's. "They need to be convinced you'll be safe, cherished." Lily straightened her shoulders. "We are safe with you, Mr. Abernathy. We know it." Daisy echoed the sentiment with a vehement nod, her blonde pigtails dancing. "You're the best." Yet, these declarations, sincere as they were, fell short. The county demanded tangible proof. Character endorsements, financial disclosures, evidence of a stable home life, elements noticeably absent in the existence of a man who favored tranquil solitude. The following day, Town Hall was overflowing. Farmers in worn overalls, shopkeepers in flour-dusted aprons. Even the mayor stepped forward to vouch for Mr. Abernathy. Mrs. Henderson recalled his quiet acts of kindness, particularly his unwavering help with her groceries. Mr. Peterson spoke of his unshakable integrity, recounting the time Mr. Abernathy returned a wallet bursting with cash. Unexpectedly, Sheriff Brody delivered the most powerful testament. He didn't dwell on kindness or integrity, but rather on resilience. He portrayed a man who had weathered unimaginable storms and emerged unbroken, a steadfast protector capable of shielding those under his care. Lily and Daisy, gripping each other's hands in the front row, felt a tidal wave of hope and disbelief wash over them. The outpouring of support was almost overwhelming. Bureaucratic gears ground slowly, but the town's unified voice was impossible to silence. At long last, a letter arrived, pristine and official, stamped with the county seal. Mr. Abernathy read the contents aloud, emotion roughening his voice. Approval. The adoption was sanctioned. Celebrations erupted in the town square. Blue and pink streamers formed a vibrant canopy above the gazebo, and the enticing scents of barbecue and freshly baked pies mingled in the air. Children chased each other, their joyous cries echoing through the gathering. Mr. Abernathy, flanked by Lily and Daisy, stood awkwardly on the gazebo, clearly unaccustomed to the spotlight. Yet, a profound warmth illuminated his eyes as he addressed the crowd. I'm not good with words," he began, his voice a little gravelly. "But I want to thank you. You've given us the home. A true home." He glanced at Lily and Daisy, his expression softening further. "And I promise to dedicate myself to ensuring they always feel loved and protected." The crowd roared its approval. Lily squeezed Mr. Abernathy's hand, tears stinging her eyes. Daisy, predictably optimistic, grabbed a handful of confetti and launched it into the air, showering them in a kaleidoscope of colors. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting long shadows across the square, Lily noticed Sheriff Brody lingering near the edge of the crowd. He observed them with an unreadable expression. "They're lucky to have him," Brody murmured, his voice barely audible. And he's lucky to have them. Lily nodded, speechless. Deep down, she knew this was merely the prologue. They had discovered a haven, a family. But the darkness of their past still hovered, and she couldn't shake the premonition that more trials awaited them. For now, however, she would cherish this moment, this feeling of belonging, this overwhelming sense of affection. It was a promising start,